starting when I was a kid, I asked the question, what was worth living for? What was worth giving myself to? My time, my energy, my heart, all of me, right? What was worth giving myself to? And the answer, for a long time, was sports. Because through sports, I achieved prowess, I achieved esteem, I achieved personal satisfaction. I achieved, and it meant something. It gave me something. But eventually, I had to come to this point where, as I'm, getting my fourth ACL reconstructed, and I'm cliff jumping like an idiot 3 weeks after surgery, where I go, oh, I guess I'm not as gifted. I'm not as Iron Man as I thought I was. So what's worth living for? And this has been the question of philosophy since the beginning, right? What is wise? What's worth living for? Before Plato and Socrates and Aristotle, there was this guy that we started reading about today named the teacher, okay? And he has a lot of the same questions that you have, that I have, that I had when I was 18, even though I didn't realize I had it. And over the next several weeks, we're going to be diving into this book of Ecclesiastes, which is this book of wisdom. And we're going to be asking what's actually worth living for? What are we actually giving ourselves to on a week in and week out basis? So I want to go ahead and I want to pray first real quick. Then we're going to jump into the text itself and find out what Ecclesiastes 1 has to say. So, Lord Jesus, you've given us your word. Now open up our eyes. Open up our ears to hear it. Lord, I pray that you will teach us through this time, that we will understand your word better, and that you'll fill us up, Lord. You'll break our hearts with wisdom, and then you'll teach us to understand it better. Lord, bless this series. We pray this in Jesus' name. Amen. Okay, so most of you have heard that it was Solomon who wrote the book of Ecclesiastes. David mentioned this earlier, and it does make sense. For those of you who are unfamiliar with the person of Solomon, I want to give you just a quick background on him, okay? Solomon was generally considered one of the wisest men in history. He was the son of the most famous king in Israel, King David, who brought Israel from obscurity into prominence in the region. And when Solomon ruled, he was kind of, and I'm just going to put it this way, he was basically the ideal version of what every millennial and Gen Z wants to be, okay? And let me explain this. First of all, he was incredibly financially and economically successful, all right? He had a mind for money, and we're told in Scripture that he made gold and silver as common as stone around Jerusalem, okay? And he's also very successful politically. He has influence on others, and his ideas seem to work. We're told that throughout his rule, he reigned for like 40 years, and throughout his rule, there was just peace across the land, peace and prosperity. It's what every ruler wants. He was educationally successful. We're told that his wisdom was so well renowned that people would travel hundreds, if not thousands of miles to come hear from him. We're given one story where the Queen of Sheba, who was very rich, very powerful, very influential, thought, I'm going to go test this out, and goes and is just blown away by the riches and the power and the wisdom of Israel under Solomon. And she's amazed. There's the famous story, of course, where there's these two women who both claim ownership over a baby. And Solomon, in his wisdom, threatens to just chop the baby in half and give them each a half, knowing that the real mother would go, oh, no, okay, just she can have the baby because it's better that the baby lives with someone else. And of course, the other woman says, no, chop it in half. And he goes, okay, well, give it to the first one, right? And so his wisdom shows up in people's personal lives, politically, socially. But on top of this, he also has a lot of freedom. He is what we call, he's sexually free. He has 700 wives and 300 concubines. Okay, so Hugh Hefner free, okay? Like, very, very free in his expression of sexuality. And we're going to read about this later throughout the book. He just says he denied himself no pleasure. If he wanted it, he took it because he could. He could basically, go on a date with a different woman every day for 3 years and not have any repeats. All right, that was his approach. But he was also religiously free. He's sort of a pluralistic guy, if you will. As he's marrying and being with all these women, they bring in many different religious perspectives, many different religions in general. And we read throughout the story that he actually goes on to be like, yeah, sure, he's building temples to different gods, he's worshiping in different gods. He's kind of doing whatever he wants in his freedom, in his power, in his authority, and life's going pretty well. Okay? That's the background of this type of teacher. Now, there are a couple things we should notice here in chapter 1. We're told that chapter 1, line 1, and also the end of chapter 12, when we get to the end of the book, it seems to indicate that this is actually someone communicating to us the teachings of the teacher. Right? So this line 1 says, these are the following is the teachings of the teacher, the son of David in Jerusalem, king in Jerusalem. But one thing that's interesting, and regardless of what we have to, we're not required to think anything about authorship, but I think one thing that's interesting is it is left anonymous, right? We're told that this is a teacher. Can be a Solomon-like teacher, right? Who can one of those people who can honestly come to you and all the people in the world and say, I have, the wealth of Bill Gates, I've got the power of the president, I've got the prestige of the royal family, right? I've got the respect and power of figures like Martin Luther King Jr. and my book club, super popular, like Oprah or something, right? And he can just say, I'm one of the few people in the history of the world who can say, all these doors are open to me. And this book is sort of that grandfatherly perspective that comes back at the end and goes, and this is what I learned. Okay? These are my conclusions about life. Right? So that sort of sets the stage for us. But we should still ask, why is this worth reading? Like, why is this important? Isn't the Bible just kind of all saying the same thing? Well, there are 3 books in the Bible called wisdom literature. And today it's just going to be a lot of background, really. But there's 3 books in the Bible that are wisdom literature. Does anybody know what the 3 wisdom literature books are?
Ecclesiastes.
Got one. Proverbs?
Job.
Nailed it. Nice. Ecclesiastes, Proverbs, and Job are considered the 3 books of wisdom literature. Each one of these books says something specific about how we ought to live life and our experience of life therein, right? They give very practical knowledge, but they all come from a little bit of a different perspective, okay? The first one, Proverbs, basically gives you, what do you think Proverbs gives us?
A lot of little proverbs.
Proverbs, yeah, aptly named, okay? Good, we're all here. All right, okay. Proverbs gives us Proverbs, okay? And these are basically short statements about helpful truths in life. Now, I think this is worth clarifying because we struggle with this a little bit. There are certain Proverbs, Proverbs 3, 5, and 6 is famous. Trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways submit to Him, and He will make your path straight. So people think, okay, good. So I follow the rules. God makes sure I'm okay. Another one that's popular is Proverbs 22:6. Train up a child in the way he should go, and even when he was old, he will not depart from it. So, okay, so I train my kids to eat well and get enough sleep and, read their Bible and do the right things. And when they get old, they will be good, healthy, Bible-reading, respectable people, right? But of course, we all know that it doesn't actually work out exactly like that. That there's some problem. That we need to realize that the book of Proverbs is a book of Proverbs, which means it tells us how things generally work out, right? It's not a book of promises. And that's where we sometimes get in trouble. We look at Proverbs and we see promises. No. This is wisdom. This is about how life usually works, okay? But because we know, and the Bible knows that life doesn't always work out this way, we're given this story of Job. Job is a story of a guy who followed all the Proverbs' wisdom. He did it right. He was righteous according to God. Like he lived well. He loved his family well. He did business well. He provided well. He was a good steward of his resources, right? And yet these catastrophes come upon Job's life. And what we see in Job's story is that Job, at first he's good. He's like, he's hanging in there with God, but then eventually it erupts into this long curse against the day he was born, and this questioning of God, and saying, someday I'm going to meet with God personally, and I'm going to tell him a thing or two, and I'm going to ask him, and then God gives this long diatribe back about his providence and his ability to work in this, right? And so we have this question where we go, okay, so we know that there's wisdom in how life should work out. And yet, in the book of Job, we know that it's no guarantee, right? And so, Ecclesiastes is this book that sort of takes us a step deeper, where we go, all right, I know that there's wise living, and that I should live a certain way. I also know that that wise living doesn't earn me any street cred with God, right? I'm not given more stuff because I'm a nice guy, right? And so Ecclesiastes kind of links these up and goes, so what? Like, why are we even trying here then? What's the point? What's the conclusion of life if we can't get anywhere with it? And I'll go ahead and bring you into the absolute apex of the book of Ecclesiastes, because it's verse 2. Meaningless, meaningless, says the teacher. Utterly meaningless. And this seems pretty dark, right? At least dark for the Bible. Like, it's probably not what you thought you were going to church to hear today. I'm going to go learn about Jesus. I'm going to go hear about God's plan for my life. And the message is, it's meaningless. Thank you for coming. I hope you enjoyed it today. Some of your translations might say vanity. I forget what this one said. This one said, what was it? Futile. Yeah, futile, vanity, meaningless, right? So I don't know if anybody else has any other translations out there. But I think the point is you'll see a variety of different translations for this word. And I think I want to start by focusing in on this word, because I think this is going to set the stage for a lot of our study from here on out. Meaningless seems to indicate that there is no meaning. And while that's sort of right, I think there's more to it. Vanity, I don't know what you think of. I feel like vanity sort of indicates maybe self-focused or self-pleasing. You know, like when you go and pamper yourself in front of a mirror, you're usually in front of a vanity. Like, that's how we use that word. So it's all about you. And that's sort of right, but there's more to it. And I want us to take a step further here. The word that the teacher uses here is actually the word heaven. Okay, that's the Hebrew word, which can mean those things, but it can also mean breath or smoke. Okay, and so I want to kind of wrestle with this idea for just real quickly here. Growing up in Wisconsin, and occasionally in winter here, we see this, right? Where you get all bundled up and you walk outside, and usually the first thing you see is your breath as it crystallizes in front of you, right? I like this one. I think it works with Hevel. It could also work if you're smoking a cigarette, or if you're around a campfire or something, you get smoke that's out there. We try to, I can reach out and try to grab my breath, right? It's there. I can see it. It's crystallizing in the air in front of me. I can see the smoke in front of me, and I can even manipulate it a little bit and try to keep it in and try to grab it, try to own it. But no matter how hard I try, I can't keep it. It dissipates. It leaves me, no matter how much effort I put in to keeping this breath, this smoke, this heaven close. Okay? And so, what do we do when the author concludes, life is like this? It's like this smoke, it's this hevel that I want so desperately. I want so badly to give myself meaning, and then I'm going to work for it so hard, but then I'm going to tear my ACL 4 times. What about when you can't hold on to it? He has a qualifier, though, that I think we need to wrestle with. In verse 3, he says, what do people gain from all their labors in which they toil under the sun? Okay? This phrase, under the sun, is going to show up 30 plus times in the book. And what he's saying is that I'm not talking about this whole afterlife thing. I'm not talking about religion. I'm not talking about I'm not bringing in anything else. I'm just saying, looking at what I can control today, what I understand through my five senses, if I can just forget what everybody else has to say, forget that Proverbs wisdom that comes from some distant, far-off religious community that's going to tell me how I should live my life, that doesn't give me anything. If I know that doesn't give me anything, and I can just measure the world around me by what I see and understand today, what's worth living for in this life, under the sun, each day when I wake up. And he goes on to examine this context, right? And he says, basically, what are we living for, right? What's worth laboring for? And he goes on, he says, look, generations come and generations go. And this is one of the things we need to wrestle with, right? We look at our world around us, and I want you guys to think about this. What are things what are things you've really given yourself to in your lives? Like, what have you just applied yourself to purposefully, passionately? Parenting. It's a good one. Okay? Education. Good? Work. Yes, very common. I get it. Parenting, education, work. Anything else?
Relationships.
Okay, relationships. Yeah, that's a good one. Anybody got any hobbies or anything?
Quilting.
Okay, quilting. Yes, the endless labor of quilting. Okay, so here's the thing. All good things, right? All good things. He's not saying these things are bad things. These are good things. But he goes on to say, look, generations come and generations go. We live our lives. We toil, we work, we just keep going. In verses 4 and 5, it says, the sun rises and the sun sets and hurries back to where it rises. The wind blows to the south, returns to the north. Round and round it goes. All streams flow into the sea, yet they're never full. The place the streams come from, they return again. All things are wearisome, more than one can say. And this to me, I was thinking about this week. It's kind of like each day when I'm coming down from where I live on the shoreline, and I'm driving down, and if the clouds are clear, I see Rainier every day in the distance. All right? And it got me thinking about, so Seattle was built in 1851, I think. And so Rainier has just sat there and watched Seattle build up from nothing, right? And we come from further and further out each day to get into that city. And if you think about the ridiculous number of stories of lives that are being lived out, hundreds of thousands, if not millions of lives are being lived out each day in that little concrete jungle, right? Where we work and we strive and we try to achieve and we try to become the next thing and we try to build the light rail out a little bit further so we don't have to drive all the way to the airport through the city, right? And we do all these little things to make life worth living. And yet you think about how many generations have come and how many generations have gone in that time, and Rainier's like, I don't care. I'm just going to keep being here. The tides just keep coming in. The tides just keep going out. The clouds keep going by. And we work so hard. But the crazy thing is that everybody in this room will be dead in 100 years. None of us are going to make it. Shoot. This building might still be here. Maybe. You know? Seattle will probably still be kicking, you know? But what are we doing this for? Why are we kicking ourselves so hard for a world that doesn't seem to care if we're doing anything? The tides come in, the tides go out. The world just keeps existing, but if there's not an end that we're directed towards, why are we even trying? He says, the eye is never enough of seeing, nor the ear its fill of hearing. What has been will be again, and what has been will be done again. There's nothing new under the sun. And some of you might think, well, Jordan, that guy was really old. He never saw an iPad. So, in your face, right? What about medical technology? What about all the cool stuff we've done? Those are new things. And I get that. That's true. But there's also this guy who was writing in the 60s, 70s named Marshall McLuhan. He talked about how how really we think things are new, but really how all technology is just extensions of our five senses into the world around us, all right? An iPad's new, but it's really just a new way to write, which is really just a new way to express my inner feelings, which is about me, right? I love our vacuum at the house because cleaning the carpet would be really difficult otherwise, right? But it's just giving a cool extension to my body that allows me to do the stuff I'm already doing. I had this experience a couple of years ago now, I guess, but I went down to this 3D gaming place, and they have one of those things where you look at it and you're like, that's the dumbest thing in the world, because it's literally like a 2x4 on a block, and you're like, so you want me to stand on that? I can do that. And they're like, yeah, we do. It's 3 inches off the ground. But here, put this headset on first. And you do, and you get up there, and all of a sudden, you're standing on a plank on a skyscraper. And you look down, and you can see the birds flying by. And there's like a plane over there. And all of a sudden, I'm walking out on this plank, like really afraid that I'm going to fall off, because I'm extending my reality into this 3D world where I feel, and I even had a conversation with the guy, and he's like, okay, jump, and I'm like, I can't. I know it's so stupid. I know I'm 3 inches off the ground. I know you're the disembodied voice talking to me from 3 feet away. But you don't understand. I'm on a plank on a skyscraper. I can't jump off this thing right now. And I had to really work myself up a couple times to be like, okay, I'm going to do it. I guess. And of course, I land long before my plummeting body in the 3D world lands, which is also scary, because I'm standing still, but I'm seeing the ground come up against me, you know? And it's, man, really cool. Also, heights aren't new. Thrill-seeking isn't new. But it is a new way for me to experience what I already had. And this is where he goes, look, it's not that they're bad. They're good things. They're good experience. They're good technology. Technology's fine. But what we're really doing is we're just kind of rethinking things we already have and saying, how do we get more? How do we make it more deep meaningful? How do I take my day in and day out sensory experience of the world and make it better? Hoping that if I just get the new thing, the new experience, it'll be more meaningful. And he kind of comes back and he says, look, what a heavy burden God has laid on mankind. I have seen all the things that are done under the sun. All of them are meaningless and a chasing after the wind. And you have to say, what's he talking about? This isn't a new question. This whole, there's nothing new under the sun. I think it's interesting, this philosophers that you guys have probably many of you heard of, even if you haven't studied them. There's a big movement in the late 20th century and late 19th century even, called existentialism, right? It's this question of what does it mean to be human? What does it mean to exist, right? And these guys had this problem. They felt like there was a problem with being human that they couldn't solve. This guy named Jean-Paul Sartre, who was a French, a lot of these guys writing, at least 2 of the 3 guys we're talking about writing after World War II, so they saw the tragedy of humanity. But he talks about how Jean-Paul Sartre says, basically, the biggest problem humanity has is that we're free. And we're paralyzed by it. We go, I come into this world and I feel like life is meaningful, but I don't know what to do with it. And I don't know how to make it meaningful. Do I have Coke or do I have Pepsi? Do I drive a truck or a sedan? I don't know what to do. What's going to make my life meaningful? And so we're paralyzed by our freedom, right? Because we only become what the kind of human we actually are through what we do. So what we do defines who we are. There's a guy named, you guys heard of, named Friedrich Nietzsche, who sort of famously declared that, or it's at least translated that God is dead, right? And he basically believes that because there is no absolute meaning, because we come into this world and there is no absolute outside of us, that there only is the will to power. Saying, look, we want to become bigger, we want to become more meaningful, we want to matter in the long run, and so all we have is the drive to do that. This is actually why he hated Christianity and Judaism, because they taught empathy and love and compassion, and he felt like that was weakening humanity as a general whole, right? And if we were going to be really strong, we were going to sort of stick with the Darwinian concept that the fittest should survive. Which, of course, I don't think Nietzsche actually would have supported Hitler, but those ideas ended up supporting some of what Hitler did in the eugenics movement later. Then, of course, there's Albert Camus, and he asked famously, like, well, why are we even here then? He actually boldly just asked, like, why don't we all just commit suicide? He says life is absurd. The fact that I feel like there's meaning and there's just not meaning just eviscerates my life. I want it to be meaningful, but I can't control it. I can't make it meaningful. What am I going to do? There's this quote. It says, dying voluntarily implies that you have recognized, even instinctively, the ridiculous character of the habit of living. The insane character of daily agitation and the uselessness of suffering, right? He's saying, you keep going down to Seattle and driving past Rainier every day and working so hard, but for what? So you can keep existing for a while? Cool. Who cares if it ends now or ends 40 years from now? Doesn't matter. Meaningless. Heaven. It's a chasing after the wind. But how we need to take this today, as we enter this study here, is that the writer of Ecclesiastes says, God has set eternity in the heart of humanity. That's in 3:11, if you're curious. But Paul says something similar in Romans 2. He says, look, it doesn't matter about people whether they have the law of God or not. We act as a law unto ourselves. There's something that seems to be written in humanity where we go, I want to be a good person. I want to be right. I want to have love and empathy and glory and power and longevity and significance, and I want to do them well, but I don't know how. And that our own conflicting thoughts about how we don't know what to do indicate that there's something going on inside you and me that we can't control. There's an essay called The Weight of Glory. It's probably one of my favorite things I've ever written. You can get a PDF online for free if you're curious. But it phrases the question this way. He says, these things, the beauty, the memory of our own past, are good images of what we really desire. But if they are mistaken for the thing itself, they turn into dumb idols, breaking the hearts of their worshippers. For they are not the thing itself. They are only the scent of a flower we have not found, the echo of a tune we have not heard, news from a country we have never yet visited. And I actually have this little excerpt tattooed on my thigh here. It says, the books or the music in which we thought the beauty was located will betray us if we trust in them. It was not in them. It only came through them. And what came through them was longing. And I think what all these writers are saying is that our longing, our restlessness in this world, is because it is without remedy in the here and now, not perfectly. It's why we think with each new election, we're finally going to find the person that's going to solve the problems. With each new job, we're finally going to find the satisfied life we're looking for. With each new move or economic influx of money, we're finally going to have the freedom that's going to give our lives a sense of security and meaning. But it always passes us by. And I think this is where you and I need to remember that we've been designed for glory, for longevity, for love, and for purpose. And yet, when we try to do it on our own, when all we look at is what's going on under the sun, we'll never find it. And so, while we won't get there for many weeks, the author of Ecclesiastes, he says in chapter 12, he says, remember your Creator in the days of your youth, before the days of trouble come, and the years approach when you say, I find no pleasure in them. And his conclusion is basically this. Your Creator, there's a reason you want love. It's because you were created in the image of a God who is love. He is Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, endlessly loving one another perfectly. You were made for that, but you can't do it by yourself. You were made for glory. You were made for significance. You were made to be in a relationship with the almighty creator of the universe, but you can't do that on your own, so you constantly feel that weight of loss following you around. You were made for longevity, too. You weren't made to live and to die. It's why we hate death. It's why we hate losing our faculties, because you were never meant to do that, right? And so we try to fill the gap. For me, it was sports. It could be money or sex or prestige or respect or fame or a person or a cause, even social justice, the arts, a political party. And we're all living for something. But you have to ask, are you restless? As St. Augustine famously said, we are all, our hearts are made for God, and they are restless until they rest in Him. So as we leave, as we kind of wrap up today and move into our time of communion, I want to remind us that there is a God whose wisdom is greater than the existential angst in your heart. The truth of what Camus and Nietzsche and Jean-Paul Sartre and 18-year-old me knew was that I want desperately for there to be meaning. But that nothing in this world can satisfy that meaning. And we worship a God who came into this earth as the person of Jesus to reveal the true heart of God, the true love of God. That's why we always go back to Him. That's why we always go back to His Word, to the Gospel, and say, who is Jesus? Because Jesus wants to meet you in a new way today and show us the eternal satisfaction that we're longing for that goes beyond the existential question. So let's go ahead and pray, and we're going to go into a time of communion. Father, thank you for your love for us, your forgiveness, and your grace. Lord, I pray that you will teach us wisdom, teach us knowledge and understanding. Meet us now in this time of communion in your body and blood. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen.